There are certain things in life that can surprise you. Birthday parties, promotions, wedding announcements, CRA audits, unexpected jail time, that sort of thing. Whether they are good or bad, there will always be things that can catch you off guard, such as Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny. I went into this movie with a set of expectations and somehow managed to walk out even more disappointed than I had anticipated. I didn't think that was possible when the bar for this movie was so low to begin with. All I can say is, thank God it's over and Kathleen Kennedy and Lucasfilm can no longer ruin another childhood hero. The cupboard is empty and they have officially run out of ideas. Bring on the independent creators with their fresh new ideas and smaller budget films that care more about story than pushing a message. Bring it on. I am ready for all of it. If we're sick of the culture, then we need to create it. If we're sick of the destruction of our heroes, then we need to create new ones and build a market around what we want to see. It's the only way the message is going to get across that we are sick and tired of this garbage. And speaking of garbage, let's talk about the movie. As many others have told me to expect, I did like the first 20 minutes or so of this film. It had shades of the original trilogy, and aside from Harrison's voice sounding different due to his age, and the fact that they kept his face primarily in the dark so as to hide the CGI they had used to de-age him, I felt like I was watching a portion of the adventures that I loved so much. But looking back now, it's made me dislike the movie even more because it offered me a glimpse of what this film could have been if they had just gone a different route. It had that same sense of adventure and resourcefulness that Indiana Jones is so known for, along with the sense of humor that always accompanied his films that made them so hilarious. But everything that followed that just sort of fell off a cliff for me. It wasn't just Phoebe Waller-Bridge, but trust me, we'll get to her. It wasn't just the fact that Indy was a tired, broken old man who needed to be encouraged and rescued by someone else using the same tactics he would have used to rescue another person. But maybe I should start there. This isn't the first time that Harrison Ford has had to be bailed out by a newly created young female brunette Kathleen Kennedy insert, but if you thought Ray was bad, wait until you meet Helena Shaw. She is by far the worst part of the movie for me. And it's not just because she's annoying, obnoxious, and disdainful of Indy, although that did contribute. It's because the trailer sold us a lie about who she was. I was expecting an over-the-top, obnoxious adventurer who wanted to drag Indy around from place to place while she searches for an elusive item that he found with her father and that holds special significance. It would have been annoying, but at the very least the character would have displayed a reverence for history. Instead, what we got is an utterly irreverent character who didn't care at all about history and the historical significance of the dial. She didn't care about what it could do or why her father was so obsessed with it, or even keeping it out of the hands of those who would use it for nefarious purposes. No. Instead, she was a treasure hunter, someone who would sell anything in order to make a profit. She allowed her godfather to be framed for murder, left him to defend himself against gun-toting madmen and Nazis. If he was younger, I wouldn't have been concerned, but Indy is frail in this movie. He cannot do the same things he did in Crusade and Temple. She doesn't really have an honorable bone in her body and outright claims that she doesn't believe in nobility or integrity. She is quite literally the antithesis of everything that Indy stood against when he was fighting Nazis who wanted to use historical items for monetary or personal profit. He wanted to ensure that artifacts were enjoyed and learned from by others for years to come. Their preservation was highly important to him, and yet this movie simply throws all of that out the window by claiming that it's a dog-eat-dog world and that everyone is out for themselves, and what's worse, should be out for themselves. It's another subtle jab at the character of Indy because it claims that his morals and values are old-fashioned and have no place in the modern world anymore. I'm not even going to talk about that scene where she claims that capitalism and stealing are the same thing. I didn't think it was possible to make her any more unlikable, but this did it for me. She is completely unrepentant that she allowed her godfather to be framed for murder and shows next to no remorse when his friends are shot right in front of him because she got involved with things that she had no business being in. Her apology to him after the fact was probably the most insincere that I have ever heard, and her ogling of all the foreign men was bizarre and a little creepy. There was one throwaway line that mentioned that she had more of an interest in the dial than just for profit. However, that was one sentence amidst all of the posturing and bragging, so it had as lasting an impact as an ice cream cone that's been left out in the sun. She doesn't respect Indy at all, disregards his wishes entirely, making him sound like a senile old man who doesn't know what he's talking about, which was the final straw for me. She is a thoroughly awful character, and if for some deranged reason Lucasfilm decides to hand her the hat and whip, it might just be the first movie in history to not make a single red cent. The villain is a complete non-entity in this movie too. Mads Mikkelsen is a great actor, but there was nothing about Voller that was threatening or made me want to see him defeated. He was utterly boring and stale, and his death was as meaningful as his life. There was also a level of sheer incompetence to this film that simply blows my mind. Helena gave Voller the wrong city name on the tablet because he couldn't read it, and yet somehow by grabbing a pair of binoculars and watching them escape, he saw that they weren't heading in the direction that they claimed to be, and so he instinctively knew what their plan was and where he could find them. They show up for the sake of plot all the time because apparently they can teleport all across the country and appear anywhere they want as a means to move the film along. Whereas in movies like The Last Crusade, you see the villains go through the same struggle to get to the Grail that the heroes do. Desert heat, lack of water, and guerrilla warfare in order to reach their prize. Finding the Grail at the end of the movie felt earned, a perfect climax to a journey that one man had been searching for his entire life. There was nothing earned about the ending of this film, and it was so absurd that I wanted to get up and walk out of the theater. There was no ultimate climax where everyone held their breath waiting to see how Indy would solve the tense situation he was in at all. Because the writers thought that using time travel to send the characters back 2,000 years to a Roman invasion at the time that Archimedes was building the dial was a good idea for a climax. Indy, of course, being the historian that he is fascinated by all of this and wants to stay, even though he's been shot and is likely to die. Of course, Helena disregards his wishes entirely and knocks him out to bring him back with them to the 60s against his will. And then Marion shows up again, and the movie just ends. He couldn't think of anything else to do at that point, so they chose an ending by throwing darts at the wall. It was like watching a bad act at a talent show come to the end of their painful performance and then shuffle off the stage, leaving an awkward silence behind. This movie was an incomprehensible mess, and somehow was worse than what my imagination made it out to be. Not only is it horribly paced, lasting for at least half an hour longer than it should have, and where you have no idea what the characters are doing or why they're doing it. There's no sense of energy or spark to this film, and the whole thing feels tired and worn out, kind of like how they want Indy to appear. All of the films in the trilogy had fans looking forward to the next scene, wondering what was going to happen. In this movie, I just couldn't wait for it all to be over. But perhaps the chief reason that I disliked this film as much as I did was the complete irreverence for history that was on full display. With the original trilogy, there was such a love and care and mystery that went into the artifacts and the stories that Indy and company were trying to recover. Even the villains had a respect for what it was they were trying to gain. Walter Donovan was a meticulous and cunning villain who used the Nazis and Elsa as a tool to try and obtain eternal life. He betrayed Indy and was relentless in his pursuit of the Grail and the history behind it. The far-off places of Jordan and the ancient libraries in Venice felt exciting and exotic. You knew you were in for a wild ride when Indy and Elsa descended into the catacombs. In this movie, Indy and Helena were in some dark temple for a grand total of 5 minutes before they all leave again and spend the rest of the film running around like chickens with their heads cut off. The original movies took the time to let the audience see the sheer scale of the temples, libraries, and of course Petra, so that we could all be amazed along with the characters. I remember watching Crusade as a kid, seeing Petra for the first time and being utterly in awe of just how ancient it was. I was even more amazed when I learned that it was a real place and people could visit it. But there was no creativity to the so-called ancient places in this movie. Not really any chance for Indy to show his smart and resourceful mind that always got him out of jams in the past. Spielberg and Lucas knew when to pause scenes and pull back so the audience could sink into the moment with the characters and experience what they were. Combine the lack of that with sloppy CGI and horrifically paced action sequences, a lot of this movie was a chore to get through, rather than a long journey with our favorite characters. I can only suspect that this was because this movie was eviscerated in the editing room because they had to reshoot it 3 times in order to make something that was even watchable. And it's barely watchable as it is. I'm so tired of writers using the age of my favorite characters as an excuse to write them as tired, sad, lonely, cowardly, and pathetic, stripping them of their characteristic resourcefulness and turning them into jokes. Legacy characters are the reason that Lucasfilm is even relevant, so why do they hate them so much? Like I said before, it's finally over. There is nothing left for Lucasfilm to ruin, and those execs behind this and the destruction of every other legacy character in the last few years will have to figure out some other way to make money, which will be difficult when they are utterly, creatively bankrupt. Thanks so much for watching this video, guys. Be sure to let me know what other aspects of movies and pop culture you want me to talk about, and let's have a conversation about it. Until next time, everyone.